Hello, you guys, and thank you so much for tuning into my channel. I just wanted to thank everyone who has just subscribed. I really appreciate all of your love, your support. I see all of your messages. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So, let's get into it. The one thing that's always annoyed me is when my friends or people around me act as though I am the transgender Bible, or they act as though I'm the encyclopedia of all transgender experiences. And often I find people asking me, my opinion on certain issues that are related to the trans experience. And what I want to say to you guys is that what you need to understand is that each and every person's individual journey is different. And how they take on their transition is entirely up to them. I can only talk about my experience. I can only share my thoughts and my feelings, and they may drastically differ from yours. You know what I mean? So the one question I always get asked by people is, what do I think of all of these children that are transitioning? Do I think it's right? Is it wrong? Like, what do I think about this? First of all, I've always found it strange that the people that seem to be the most concerned about this topic are people that do not have transgender children themselves. It'll be parents that are busy with their 8 cisgender kids that have never shown any type of gender dysphoria. It'll be people who don't have kids, people whose kids are grown AF. Like, everybody is. And I'm just like, okay. I understand to some degree why people would be concerned. However, you need to understand, in the United States of America at least, transgender people make up less than 1% of the population. Now, within that 1% of the population, how many of those people are accepted by their families? How many of those people would even be given the opportunity to transition when they're 3 years old? Come on, like, y'all, let's not be intellectually dishonest. How many of that 0.6% trans people, how many of them come from families that can support them financially in terms of their transition? When we talk about the children whose parents allow them to transition, we are literally talking about an absolute minority. An absolute minority. Never in my years of transitioning have I ever met anybody, here or in the United States, that transitioned when they were 3. Now, let's talk about it. Let's really get into the children who transition when they're young. For myself, one of the things that's always brought me pain is the fact that I felt that my childhood was robbed from me. I essentially had to perform masculinity from the minute I could walk. It was expected of me. And because I was being raised as a little boy, it meant that I never got to experience all of the important developmental peaks and milestones that other little girls get to experience. And it definitely damaged me. Now, would I have wanted, in a hypothetical, situation, if I had a mother and a father who could afford to help me transition, if I had parents who understood what transgender is and we lived in a society back then that even allowed for that to happen, would I have wanted to transition at 6 years old? And the answer, if I had to be honest, is no. The reason I would not have wanted to transition at 6 years old is not that I didn't feel that I was a girl. I definitely felt that I was a girl. I felt in my heart that I was. My fear, and we often see this in the documentaries, we see these kids who are allowed to transition when they're 5 years old, when they're 7 years old, when they're 10 years old. And then we hear them at 22 talking about feeling like they made a mistake. Or we'll hear some of them talk about feeling like their body didn't develop naturally. Or we'll hear them talk negatively about aspects of their transition. And I think the reason for that is these kids often, and not all of them, we have to acknowledge that the majority of kids who do transition when they're young become successful later on in life, but there is a minority of kids who actually struggle because of this, because of early transitioning. And I know for myself, if I had been 6 years old and my parents had allowed me to live as a girl, I would have dealt with the grown-up parts of transitioning at an age where developmentally I was not ready. I know we all like to think back and think that, oh, if I had just been allowed to be a girl at 7, everything would have been perfect. What you need to understand is passing and the whole idea of being stealth would have been brought to you at a very, very early age. And you would have not have been surrounded by people who understood, who had had a lived experience of being trans. The one thing that's always stuck out for me is that these kids who transition have to defend their femininity or masculinity at a very early age. And even after they're allowed to live as girls and boys, they often talk about being alienated, being rejected, being suicidal. Of course, these feelings come as a result of the hostile environment that they live in, but they do deal with these things. I'm not saying that children should not be allowed to live in their authentic truth. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying for myself, at 6 years old, it would have been better for me to live a life that was almost genderless, where no gender expectations were placed on me, where if I wanted to climb a tree and wear pants, I could. If I wanted to be a princess and play with my Barbies, I could. If I wanted to grow out my hair, I could. For me, it would have been far better to have lived in an environment where people were like, we are going to leave you to figure this stuff out on your own. We're going to leave you to figure it out, to figure out your feelings, and we're going to be here to support you. A lot of kids that transition when they're like 5 and 6 and 7, they later on when they're about 12 and 13, they get on not hormone replacement therapy, but they get on something called puberty blockers. Now, puberty blockers prevent they prevent the body from developing the way it would have. And the reason these kids are given puberty blockers is to give them time to figure out if this is the right path for them. And a lot of kids that are wealthy enough, because what you need to understand, there are financial limitations in terms of transitioning. And families that can afford to put their kids on puberty blockers are usually the upper middle class and the 1%, because puberty blockers are expensive. And normally, at about 13, 14, 15, 16, that's when a lot of parents would introduce estrogen if it's M to F, or testosterone if it's, F to M. Now, I would imagine if you had started transitioning at 5 years old, that by 16, having lived most of your life as, as a female or as a male or whatever you had chosen, you would know by then. You would know by then. You would know by then. But at the same time, like, my issue with the kids who are allowed to transition when they're young is that we don't allow for them to change their minds. We don't we don't allow trans people to change their minds. When people come up and they're like, I'm trans, I feel like I should have been born female, and they transition, and then 6 years later they come back and they say, no, I made a horrible mistake, I shouldn't have transitioned. We shame those people. And I feel like the way that we have looked at transitioning, the way that we have allowed and disallowed people to transition has been very toxic. We're living in an era and time where transitioning still, however you do it, is still toxic. There's still issues that you deal with. I know so many of us want to think that all of these kids that are allowed to transition at 5 years old are doing the right choice, and we need to support them, and we need to push and shut out any voices that dare speak against them. I know a lot of us feel that way, and for the longest time, I felt that way. But I think it's more important. It's more important to just step back. If the child wants to transition, allow that child, guide them along the way, but create an environment, at least within the home, where it is okay if that child decided to change their mind at 16, at 25, at 47, at 13. It's okay. It's totally okay. And if they wanted to change it back, that is okay too. Because we are placing too many restrictions on how people can, authentically live their existence. What does it matter if, Bobby started off as a boy, and then 6 years later he turned into Bridget? And then when Bridget was 16, Bridget realized that she really wanted to be Bobby again. And then at 25, Bobby decides that, no, I'm actually, I have no gender. I'm just a soul incarnate in this body. And sometimes I'm masculine, other times I'm feminine. What's wrong with that? Like, I've heard so many people within the trans world, within the trans space and communities, that act as though if these kids dare change their minds, they are persona non grata and we have to kick them out of the community. And at the same time, on the opposite end of the spectrum, I've seen and I've heard so many conservative voices talking about how we can't allow kids to transition. It's going to destroy their lives. This is the worst thing that has ever happened. I mean, I wish y'all had the same energy for all the kids that are being molested. I wish y'all had the same energy for all the women that are being raped. I wish y'all had the same energy for the kids that are being trafficked. Because at the end of the day, it annoys me that us as the trans community, we've become such a hot button topic. even though we make up less than 1% of the entire population, people still want to nitpick at our issues while we as a community are still trying to understand them. We're still trying to have compassion and love for our fellow trans people. I, as a trans woman, I can't tell you whether or not it's right or wrong for your 7-year-old to transition because I don't have a 7-year-old. I'm not a mama. So how can I talk from a place of knowledge when I've never parented anyone? And again, even if I did have a kid, is my kid cis or trans? And even if my kid is struggling with gender identity, girl, it's still a different situation. We're not the same. Y'all make me want to drink. I just wish people would actually support the trans community, because for me, like, if you support the trans community, you wouldn't vilify people that chop and change, because you would understand that dysphoria of any kind is a killer. You would understand that it takes courage to basically uproot your whole life and become somebody else and still fight and defend who that new person is. If you actually supported the trans community, y'all wouldn't be so That's why us as the trans community, we need to just come from a space of love, and we just need to support and encourage people in their journeys. I promise you, kids transitioning at 6 years old, girl, they are an absolute minority. They're an absolute minority that still deserves respect, that deserves love, that deserves protection. And if at any point they decide to change their minds, they still deserve love and protection. Let's just learn to love and support each other as we walk this journey. Those of us that come into transition and find that it is not the authentic way that we want to express, we love you and we release you to experience whatever is meaningful in your life. It does anger me that certain people have become so far right and so liberal and so extremist that they act against the best interest of the patient, of the trans individual. It angers me how so many psychologists are just quick to write referral letters without properly evaluating what is going on. You know what I mean? I'm not saying that you need to be psychoanalyzed for the next 24 months. What I am saying is that before you as a medical practitioner write a recommendation for any type of hormone, you need to first properly assess the individual. You need to first make sure that you are first doing no harm. And if at any point you feel that the issue may not necessarily be a trans-related issue, we as a society need to be able to allow that conversation without demonizing people. My angel, like, I get a lot of us want to transition as in yesterday. We want everything done as in yesterday. But what you need to understand is that transitioning takes time. It takes time. And in order for you to have the best transition, everyone that is around you, everyone that is helping you, everyone that is supporting you needs to make sure that they're giving you the right kind of support. And even if you do change your mind, even if you go through all of that and you decide to detransition, it's still your choice, and people should still love and support you in that. Everybody wants to act up just because some of the kids that transitioned when they were 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 detransitioned at 21. That's an absolute minority. And if they do decide to detransition at 21, that is still their right. You know what I mean? It's still their right. And we need to look at, and we need to look into everyone that was involved in those individual experiences, everyone that was involved in assisting or in hindering or helping those young souls transition. What I need from y'all, though, what I really need from y'all, all my lovely cisgender supporters, is stop with the fake activism. Stop acting like y'all are cared or concerned about trans people. Be honest. A lot of these allies and supporters, especially the male supporters, when they think of transgender, they have one idea in mind: a woman that is sexually available for their pleasure. And the minute we talk about trans men, trans teenagers, children, then they start to feel uncomfortable and they start to be against transitioning as a whole. Be honest. You only want trans women as some sexual thing. You don't really support the whole concept or the idea of somebody living their authentic self. And the second thing I really need y'all to do is that if you don't have a child that is wanting to transition, I need you to just talk about your child's issues. Let's talk about your child. Leave other people that you've never met and their kids alone, girl. Leave them alone. Leave them alone. And the third thing that I need y'all to do is to just listen to these kids. That's all. Just listen to them. Just listen to them and support them, whatever that support looks like. That's all I need from y'all. I love y'all. I do love y'all. But I need y'all to leave these babies alone. Leave these babies alone, y'all. Like, just leave them alone. I love you guys so much. And bye.